Om Parthaya Pratibodhidam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Grathidam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaidam Rudavarshinim Bhagavadim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatva Manusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Yam Brahma Varunendra Rudramarudastunnandi Divyaistavaihi Vedai Sangapadakramopaniषदे Gayanti Yam Samagaha Dhyanavastita Tadgatena Manasa Pashyanti Yam Yogino Yasyandam Navidusura Suraganaha Devaya Tasmai Namaha. We were discussing the 27th verse of the 9th chapter, which is a very, very famous verse. It has been quoted by many scholars. Whenever you talk about the very idea of devotion to God, this is considered to be the essence of translating spirituality into our everyday life. When we eat food, when we talk, when we walk, when we engage in different activities of everyday responsibilities, we can practice spirituality. So one significant important aspect of this verse is it comes down to the everyday life situations. Yad karoshi, yad asnasi, yad jugoshi, dadasi, yad tapasyasi kaunteya, tat kurushva madarpanam. So, whatever we do, whatever we eat or whenever we eat, and when we practice rituals, when we give something to somebody, of course when we receive something from somebody, and when you sit somewhere in meditation, contemplation, do that with a sense of dedication to God. Now, one may ask the question, what's the difference between doing this with a great efficiency, enthusiasm, great application, concentration, and without bringing the spiritual idea of dedication? Now, what's the difference? From a purely psychological point of view, there's a great difference. First of all, if we don't have a sense of dedication, we may be able to achieve great things, we may be able to accomplish great things, we may be able to practice great efficiency, enthusiasm, responsibility, leadership skills, result orientation, all that. But the point is, our mind may not be able to enjoy the fruits of our own labor. That's the main problem. If we don't dedicate to something or somebody, some higher ideal, then we'll be worried about, anxious about, well, what is going to be the result? Am I going to get the expected result? Or am I going to get the result less than my expectation, or am I going to fail? This anxiety is a psychological element. You cannot avoid it. You talk about anybody, think of anybody. There have been cases, there have been instances when great emperors, Napoleon Bonaparte was, after his first defeat, he was sent to St. Elba, St. Helena and St. Elba, the first island. And within just a few months, he developed grey hair, he became emaciated. This is the story of possibly one of the greatest, most dynamic human beings world civilization has produced. Now, he was not inefficient, he was not irresponsible, he was not ineffective. He had enough of all these qualities. So this happens to everyone. This happens to business people, executives, everyone. I have done this, what is going to happen? You watching the stock market's fluctuations, that also translates into hair getting gray or face getting wrinkled, and maybe and sleepless nights and anxieties. On the other hand, this simple psychological mechanism, it is not that a spiritual mechanism. Dedicate to somebody something, and you find a great weight is lifted off your shoulders. I gave this example. Suppose you're carrying a big box on your head. You naturally feel the heaviness, the strain. But suppose there is 1 millimeter gap between the top of your head and the bottom of the box. 1 millimeter gap. So the box exactly doesn't touch the hairline. You don't feel any strain. This dedication helps you to create that 1 millimeter gap between the top of the hairline and the bottom of the box, the heavy box you are carrying. If it touches the hairline, you feel the heaviness, the strain. But if it is lifted off by just 1 millimeter, if it doesn't just touch the hairline, you don't feel the strain. So when you do something with a sense of dedication, what happens is the mind is taken away from the strain, from the anxiety. The mind is not taken away from concentration. The mind is only taken away from the extra worry, the extra strain. And that's why Gita has got a very wonderful verse. This comes, I think, the 4th chapter. Saktaha karmani avidvamso yatha kurvanti bharata kuryat vidwan tatha asaktaha chigishuku loka sangraham. This is the verse. Now, 2 types of personalities are presented here. Both of them, maybe they are brothers, both of them have the same level of efficiency, the same level of enthusiasm, dynamism, application, concentration, and focus. Both are working very hard, and both are equally successful. But there is one difference, and fundamental difference. One is called saktaha, meaning in Sanskrit, sakta means somebody who is attached, who is always worrying. I have done, what am I going to do, what am I going to get, am I going to succeed, or am I going to fail? If I don't succeed, what is going to happen to me? How am I going to face the problem? So this constant worry, anxiety, this heaviness on the mind, that is the characteristic of one type of person. Very efficient, very active, very enthusiastic, a great executive, but every minute he is worried, he is anxious. Am I going to succeed? Is it going to happen or not? Or if I fail, what will be the next? So a chain of thoughts, this constant mind-wandering chain of thoughts one after another. They build one anxious thought over the other. This is the characteristic of one person, saktaha. So, and that sort of person is called the ignorant ones. Avidvamsa means the ignorant ones. Means those who do not know that this technique of doing things with a sense of dedication to higher ideal. Those who are ignorant of this technique, applying this technique of dedication or practicing this technique of non-attachment. Then there is another person, and he is called the wise man in the same verse. Kurya Vidwan. Vidwan means the intelligent person, the wise person, the enlightened one. He also does work with the same efficiency. He may be working for longer hours, maybe facing greater challenges, maybe achieving greater things, but is absolutely unaffected. He is calm and quiet. So there is no difference with regard to the efficiency of the effectiveness of the work. But there is one fundamental difference with regard to our approach, our attitude towards the work and its result. So, the Vidwan, the intelligent one, does it with a sense of non-attachment. Non-attachment is not indifference. Non-attachment, or it is called being unaffected. I give the example of Gandhi because I've given so many times, so perhaps it's not proper to repeat. Gandhi, Gandhi himself he interpreted Gita as a book of the psychology of, maybe called spiritual psychology of non-attachment. And he slept only for 5 hours a day. And he used to walk, this long Dundee march. He led a large number of people to the seashore to make salts as an act of protest against the taxation, extra taxation and salt making. And it is said that other healthy young fellows could not catch up with him by walking hundreds of miles. And this man slept only for 3-4 hours, 5 hours a day. And if you look at this picture, he was not a muscular, big wrestler or something. He was a very, very ordinary looking person. So where was the strength? He was non-attached. So when you do that, you can face the greatest challenges in the world, but with a smile. And the smile creates this 1 millimeter gap between the bottom of the box and the hairline. That non-attachment. And this actually helps you to conserve a lot of energy. Actually, when we become worried and anxious about every bit of work we are doing, it's actually our energy is drained. Concentration is broken. Focus is gone. And mind gets tired. You can easily test this yourself. Suppose you work for 5 hours and then you say, I have worked for 5 hours. When you mention that, you feel, you should take rest for half an hour. But suppose you don't feel you're working for 5 hours. So when you remind yourself of the fact that you have worked hard for 5 hours, then you become tired. So suppose you don't do that, people who take life as a hobby, they can look upon their own life as a hobby. In fact, there is one important point mentioned in the Vedanta literature again and again. So Leela means sport. If you can look at life as a sport, problem is solved. Because when you are playing for relaxation, you don't worry, you are not anxious. If you are anxious, if you worry too much about every bit of games you are playing as a hobby, then it's not a hobby. It becomes a problem. Suppose we can take our whole life as a hobby, including going to the office, working in the hospital, everything is a hobby, then you can look at your life the way a child looks at his playing with his friends in the evening. So that's what actually Lord Krishna is talking about here. Yet karoshi, yet asnasi, yet jugoshi, dadasi tadyat. Eating is mentioned here, doing things are mentioned here. These are all symbolic. Doing things, different responsibilities. Eating means even our everyday, like eating food, drinking water when you're thirsty or when you walk, you have to reach a goal, you're cooking, that's a part of life, totally indispensable. These are all things that everyone has to do to preserve life. Suppose we can look at the whole thing as a play. It's not just some kind of an imaginary idea. That's what Lord Krishna is talking about here. Look up our own life as a play. This is mentioned in one of Shankaracharya's bhashyas. And the term he uses is Rajnyaha Veena Vadanavat. Veena means no violin. There may be not exactly violin, something like that in an Indian musical instrument, much bigger. Suppose a king, Rajnyaha means a king. The king playing on a violin in his court. This is a simple example. Now, the example is very, very funny. Suppose a king invites a professional violinist a musician, and ask him to play in his court, then you can imagine the condition of the musician. In ancient times, when kings used to reign, they used to rule, and no democracy in those days. So the musician, the violinist will be very anxious to put up a good performance. If he doesn't do very well, then he may be punished. He may not be rewarded. If he does very well, he may get some rewards also. So he'll be very anxious to put up his best effort to make a very good performance. Because he knows that if he doesn't succeed, if he doesn't play very well, he may be even punished. Now, suppose instead of the violinist playing in his court, suppose the king himself takes up his own violin and plays in his court. He doesn't have to worry about pleasing anyone. He will be totally relaxed. He may be very poor violinist, but he knows that he is not going to be punished if he doesn't play very well. So absolutely free from anxiety. Now, that is the example given in Shankaracharya's commentary, in the Brihadaranyaka commentary. Rajnyaha Veena Vadana, like a king playing violin in the court. I mean, totally free from any kind of anxiety and worry. So, that we already discussed briefly, this 27th verse. 28th we didn't discuss, that's what we are going to take up today. Subha Subha Phalairevam Mokshase Karma Bandhanehi Sannyasa Yoga Yuktatma Vimukto Mam Upaishyasi. Now, Lord Krishna says, you will be totally freed from all kinds of bondages of actions. Every action has a binding effect. It becomes a chain. When we do something and when we worry about the results, on the one hand, a part of the mental energy will be lost, drained off, because we are worried. Secondly, it becomes a bondage. So, when you practice non-attachment or a kind of renunciation should not be understood to be giving up of the reward or the fruits of your labor. Not at all. No karma yogi will be negligent or indifferent to the quality of his job or work. He'll be doing much better. Who are the greatest achievers of the world? You can imagine. Actually, the greatest spiritual teachers were the hardest working human beings you have ever read about in human history. You think of a man like Shankaracharya, 32 years, became a monk when he was less than 7 years, wrote the most profound philosophical classics in Indian philosophy, Advaita, is the founder of Advaita as a philosophical system, wrote the most exquisite, profound devotional poetry in Sanskrit. He would have ranked as the greatest Sanskrit poet above Kalidasa if he had not written these philosophical classics. And founded 10 monastic orders. Remember, Ignatius Loyola was the founder of Jesuit order. Shankaracharya founded 10 such monastic orders. And traveled all over Indian subcontinent 4 times. He installed some hundreds of temples. Founded 4 monasteries in 4 distant corners of India, all the way from Indo-China border right up to extreme south and east and west. And that is up to 16th year. From 16th year onwards, he went about traveling, debating, exchanging, arguing, debating with nihilists, non-conformists, those who try to spread the philosophy of skepticism, cynicism, Epicureanism, that's Mimamsa philosophy, Bohemianism, and so on. And this man passed away in 32 years. And we are reading Gita because the Gita itself is his creation. There are 18 Gitas in Sanskrit literature, Mahabharata, Bhagavata together. And Shankaracharya wrote a commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. So he became immortal. Today you ask anybody what is the central book of Hinduism? Bhagavad Gita. Not before Shankara. In fact, there are more Gitas with the same title, more or less. Much more profound. But Shankara touched with his magical hand, it became immortal. 32 years. You can imagine, or anybody, Buddha. We remember Buddha today. Christ, he was only a very short-lived person. We still remember him 2,000 years ago. So you can imagine, you can't compare any achievers in material fields with these great spiritual teachers. How could they accomplish so much? Because they did everything, but they dedicated everything to higher ideal. That is non-attachment. That's what Lord Krishna is talking about here in the 28th verse. Sannyasa yoga yuktatma vimukto mam upaishasi. Those who are practicing the renunciation of the results of the labor to a higher ideal, and they are liberated in their life. That's the meaning. The next important verse is the 29th one. That is very, very famous verse. It is Samoham sarvabhudeshu name deshyosti na priyaha na bhajanti tumam bhaktya mayite teshu chapyakam. It requires a lot of explanation. The simple meaning is this: I am the same to all. I have no prejudice. I have no favorite. I am not against anyone, and nobody is a special favorite of mine. I don't hate anyone. No one is particularly dear to me. But those who worship me, and through this higher spiritual practice of renunciation, non-attachment, I am living in them and they live in me. This is the 29th verse. No, I didn't require some explanation. What's the meaning of this? The first important, aham samaha, means I am the same, I am equal to everyone. So the idea is, I am present in everyone. Water is present in every drop of water in the ocean. So water is present in the mighty waves, in the bubbles, in the drops. Everywhere water is present. But water is present in so many different ways. It manifests in so many different ways. Sunlight, it is present in a dark glass. It reflects on a dark glass, but it doesn't reflect very well. Suppose the mirror is pure, effulgent. The sunlight reflects with full effulgence. Now, if you remove the dust, if you wipe off the dust from the dirty glass, then the sunlight begins to reflect with more and more effulgence on the glass. Similarly, when we practice spiritual disciplines, it could be karma yoga, this kind of doing everything with a sense of dedication and non-attachment, with a sense of dedication to a higher ideal. Then what happens? The dust is slowly removed. You're taking a piece of paper and wiping off the dust from the surface of the mirror. But at the same time, sunlight reflects everywhere. So also clay is present in all the pots and pans made of clay. Gold is present in all golden ornaments. But the point is, the quality of the presence of gold depends upon the quality of workmanship. So this actually underlines one important principle in Vedanta. When we ask this question, if God is present in everyone, how do we understand this? There are two types of understanding this principle. First of all, if you think of God as one omnipresent divine reality present everywhere, then according to our own mind, according to purity of our mind, the presence of God will manifest in our character. When we become pure, when we do good deeds, when we perform our duties with a sense of love and compassion and non-attachment, then what happens? Our mind becomes more and more pure. Then the presence of the Lord, like the sunlight, becomes more and more present in our mind, in the mental system. When our mind becomes impure due to bad thoughts, bad emotions, bad feelings, negativity, what happens, the sunlight will not reflect. The presence of the Lord, presence of God will not manifest. In other words, Buddha can be compared to a beautiful mirror. Pure, absolutely no dust on the surface. Buddha or anybody, any Buddha, Christ, or Ramakrishna, or anybody for that matter. Now, there are certain other characters in history. We don't consider them to be manifestations of the divine. We cannot. What it means is, it's not that the divine is not manifesting in them, but the mental system is like a dirty, filthy, dusty surface of a mirror. So the sunlight doesn't reflect on that dusty mirror. So, in other words, Vivekananda says, the difference between an amoeba and a Buddha is one of degrees and not of kind. There's a well-known sentence in Vivekananda's interpretation of Raja Yoga, not in this context, but it's very relevant here. The difference between a highly evolved spiritual person and a very crude person who is the opposite of spirituality. The difference is in the spiritual person, that divine reality is manifesting in the highest degree. In the other person, it is at a very low, almost zero. That's a difference in degrees, difference in kind. Now, this can be contradicted because there is another verse. This is the first line. The second line is, Ye bhajanti tu mam bhaktya maite teshu chapyakam. The meaning of this verse is, those who worship me, I am present in them, I will be present in them, and they will be present in me. So how do you understand this? What it means is, those who practice spiritual disciplines, yamas and niyamas, and other ethical, moral values like compassion, broad-mindedness, etc. In them, I am present. In a highly evolved person, I am fully present, and they also are present in me. So this idea of spirituality goes beyond the creator idea. In Hindu monotheism and all monotheistic ideas of different world religions, the standard interpretation of God is the totality of all good qualities constitute God. This is absolutely true. But from a higher perspective, Vedanta will tell you that God is not specially favorable to a particular person, and He is not hateful to another kind of person. So where God is concerned, He is impartial. He is totally unprejudiced. But depending upon our spiritual evolution, our own mental makeup, the presence of the Lord is really happening in our life. So God is considered to be as an impartial judge, as somebody supreme friend of everyone, very impartial, very unprejudiced, and depending upon our own spiritual qualities, the presence of the Lord manifests in all of us. Anyone can start his spiritual journey. In fact, that's the subject of next verse. These verses are interrelated. The 29th and 30th one. The 30th one is very important because it tells you that if a person, if an individual takes a decision to start a new chapter in his life, then it is as good as has reached his goal. That is the essence of this 30th verse. Apiche sudiracharu bhajade mam ananyabhag sadhureva samantavyaha samyak vyavasido hisaha. He says, even a very wicked person, if he turns to God, if he turns to spirituality, with one-sided devotion, he should be considered to be a great devotee. He should be considered to be a great spiritual person. So how do you explain this? The point is, when we take a decision, a real decision in spiritual life, it is as good as we are boarding the bus. We have boarded the bus, we have entered the plane, then it is as good as you reached the destination. This may not be true in material life, but in spiritual life, it is true. So, this decision here means, in Sanskrit, it is called prapatti or self-surrender or sharanagati. That's the meaning. It's a simple mechanism in spiritual life. Sometimes it is called emptying the mind in Buddhist Vijnanavada, the subjective idealism. You know, when a glass in our hand is half filled with water, and if somebody pours water into the glass, you can, at the most, you can get only 50% milk. The other 50% will be mixed with water. But suppose the glass is completely empty, then somebody pours milk into the glass, then you get 100% pure milk, glass full of water. Similarly, if we can take a decision, that is what is mentioned here, apiche sudhiracharo bhajate mam ananya bhak. Even an extremely wicked person who is the archetype, maybe a symbol of the evil, if such a person, if he repents, if he takes a decision, well, tomorrow onwards I won't do anything wrong. If that decision is 100% decision with full conviction, then that moment onwards he has become a saint. That's the meaning of this. But remember, this decision making takes a lot of resolve. If our decision is 100% honest, then it is as good as you have reached the goal. This is an important thing. In fact, that is called prapatti or sharanagati in Vedanta. In fact, it is called repentance. Of course, there are many verses in Bhagavad, Manusmriti and others, One verse is Ajnana yadiva jnana krutva karma vigarhidam tasma vimukti manyuchan didiyam na samacharet. If a person, he takes a decision today or this moment, that tomorrow onwards I shall live differently, or I shall stop doing certain things, or shall I start doing certain things. If the decision is 100% sincere, with full 100% conviction, then that decision itself is as good as reaching the goal. Unlike getting into a plane, because the plane may not be able to land in your destination. It may take some time long, it may be delayed. But in life, when that 100% conviction is there in our mind, then we are never too late and you are never lost. That is the spiritual psychology of this whole philosophy of repentance. In the Sanskrit verse that I quoted from Mahabharata, what it says is, anyone who has been doing for many years something wrong, and he really sincerely wants to start a new chapter in his life, start a new leaf, in a new page in his life, he can begin that moment, that day. In fact, that split second decision is enough. That is as good as reaching the goal. This is the essence of this is a special characteristic of spiritual psychology. In fact, krutva papam na santasya tasmat papat pramuchyade na ida kuryat punaridi nivritya puyade naraha. Means, again, it's actually Manusmriti. Manu is an ancient lawgiver. What he says is, I won't do it again. That's a literal meaning of Manu's statements. If a person decides with 100% conviction that he won't do certain things again, that decision is as good as turning a new chapter in his life. So that's why Lord Krishna says, Apije Suduracharo Bhajade Mam Ananyabhag Sadhureva Samantavyaka. He says, such a person who has taken such a decision to start a new leaf in his life, he should be considered to be a saint because he has already reached the goal. This applies only to spiritual life. In material life, your decision making, the starting the journey, reaching the goal, there may be different intervals. But in spiritual psychology, it is different. In fact, at the mental level, when we actually decide to do certain things, not related to physical activity, related to thought, that split moment, our mind takes on a new journey. Our mind begins to work differently. It is called prabhati. It's an important topic in many, many scriptures. In some scriptures you find this requires two elements, two aspects. One, our effort and God's grace. That's true. So the point is, and actually there is a blending of the two. When we do our best, then God's grace is the natural result of it. On the other hand, if we don't make our effort, then God's grace will not have much effect, because if God himself appears before us right now, we may think that he has just to come to attend our class. So it depends upon our own preparedness. A person who has spent long time in meditation, spiritual disciplines, practicing spiritual disciplines, his mind becomes ready to be sensitive to spiritual values. He alone can understand spirituality. So that's why Lord Krishna says, if a person has complete faith, strong determination, he has as good as reached the goal. This, of course, we can find in the examples of many devotees. I cannot give you a better example than the example of Girish Chandra Ghosh. In fact, I gave 2 lectures on this subject recently in the new temple. About 3 weeks ago, Sunday lectures. Is an example. I cannot give a better example than this. Girish Chandra Ghosh was a bohemian, a profligate, a very indisciplined person who didn't care for anybody, and he didn't care whether somebody cared for him or not. He didn't accept anyone. He questioned everything. He was a skeptic, he was very cynical, full of intellectual arrogance, but he was a genius. He was a genius. When he was fully drunk, he wrote dramas and plays, and they became masterpieces. More like Dostoevsky. But Girish Chandra Ghosh had one advantage. He met with Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. So Dostoevsky didn't have that privilege. So one day he was fully drunk. He was actually about to engage in some absolutely undesirable activities, and suddenly he felt an impulse to go to Sri Ramakrishna. He went to Sri Ramakrishna, and Sri Ramakrishna was immersed in meditation, and he was chanting the name of God, some hymns and prayers and all that. And Girish Chandra was fully drunk, so he thought Sri Ramakrishna was drinking something much better than what he was drinking. So he asked his Sri Ramakrishna assistant, could you tell me the brand of the thing that he's drinking? Seems to be much better. Then, of course, he said, nothing like that. He's always meditating, he's thinking of God, he's always immersed in higher thoughts. He's not a drunkard like you. But this man wanted to be like that, because he was, his story is very tragic. He lost his mother at the time of his own birth. The mother died at childbirth, and he lost his father when he was a boy, and the father was not a very particularly endearing type of fellow. He didn't have any pleasant memories about his father even, and he lost his wife when he was 30 years old. This was history, and nobody used to care for him. And everyone looked down upon him. Now, This man suddenly found in Sri Ramakrishna somebody who did not blame him, who did not criticize him, who did not curse him for being what he was. So he felt an impulse to meet him again, and then he met Sri Ramakrishna. And finally one day Sri Ramakrishna asked him, well, could you do some little spiritual practice? Maybe morning or evening, can you take the name of God once? He was a very sincere person, Girichandra Ghosh. He was certainly a very indisciplined person, very arrogant person, but very sincere. He said he knew he won't be able to take the name of God. So he was not going to give a false promise. He said, no, I can't. Then Sri Ramakrishna said, well, can you take the name of God? Maybe just before food, before your lunch. Well, he doesn't know. He didn't know where he was going to get up, where he was going to sleep. He did not know when he was going to eat food. He was totally unhinged, absolutely no discipline in his life. So Sri Ramakrishna understood this man is sincere after all. So what happened, Sri Ramakrishna told him, well, you take a decision. You just give your spiritual responsibility to me. So the word used is a Bengali word which is translated into English as the power of attorney. That's not perhaps the best translation, because in the power of attorney in according to law, in the legal term, it can be revoked. But spiritual power of attorney cannot be revoked. So when Girichandra Ghosh said, well, I'm going to give you my complete responsibility to you, Sri Ramakrishna accepted. After that, it became totally impossible for Girichandra Ghosh to do anything wrong. He was about to drink, he threw away the glass, he broke his liquor bottles, he stopped playing cards, he stopped doing wrong things. Practically, it was as if somebody had caught him by the throat, and he could not do anything wrong in his life afterwards. Now, here, he did not take a decision not to do anything in future, because Sri Ramakrishna did not ask him to stop drinking. Sri Ramakrishna knew he will say, no, I cannot stop it. But Sri Ramakrishna asked him to give the power of attorney, and Girichandra Ghosh did not realize what it really meant in spiritual psychology, spiritual life. What it means is, it became impossible for him to do anything wrong. Now, that is one kind of self-surrender called prapatti. Prapatti is defined in Vaishnava tradition. Anugulyasya sankalpaka pradigulyasya varjanam rakshasridhi viswasa goptrutva varanam tatha atma nikshepaka arpanne shadvidha sharanagati. This is a definition of Ramanuja. It means when you are always positive in your thoughts, giving away all negative thought currents, you completely depend upon God as your one single protector, and you completely surrender yourself to a higher holy cause, then you're practicing this self-surrender. So here, Girichandra Ghosh decided one important thing. He decided to give his complete spiritual responsibility to Sri Ramakrishna. And afterwards, he never worried. So that kind of complete dedication, sincerity, with that if a person takes a decision to live a new life, it becomes easy for him. That's an important thing to remember. So that complete dedication, that's what really matters. Then it becomes impossible for that person to do anything wrong. And he won't question, Suppose you give a donation $50 to a person. Then next day you ask him, what did you do with my $50? Then he may not be very happy. Once you give something to somebody, you should not bargain after that. You should stop all argument. So that is what Lord Krishna is talking about. If a spiritual seeker takes a decision once in his life with complete sincerity, with 100% conviction, that split second he is actually entering the road to spiritual progress. It needs only one split second. At a physical level, every physical activity needs some time, at least a few minutes. But to take a decision, it takes only just a split second. And the moment you take that decision, you are already on the road to spiritual liberation. That's why Lord Krishna says, such a person should be considered to be a saint. Dharmatma means a virtuous person, a man full of virtuous, righteous qualities. That is the 30th verse. The 31st one is, of course, this 9th chapter is coming to an end. I shall just begin this verse, then I'll continue next session. Kshipram bhavati dharmatma shasyuchandim nigacchati kaunteya pradijanihi name bhakta pranasyati. Such a spiritual devotee will not come to harm anywhere, anytime. But kshipra means immediately, on the spot. Remember, in spiritual life, it takes only a split second. Taking a decision is not something that requires a lot of speculation. If a person really, when you are holding something that is terribly hot, you don't contemplate for a long time before dropping it. Because it's hot. It's a natural reflex action, a split second. Similarly, Lord Krishna says, Kshipram bhavati dharmatma. This ability to take on a new spiritual journey, it doesn't take much time. Kshipra means very quickly, in split second it happens. Immediately, he becomes a new person. What happens, his spiritual journey begins. Shashya chandin nigacchadi. He is endued with a new sense of inner fulfillment and contentment and happiness and peace. Because when he takes in a new spiritual journey, the whole mental system changes. That's an important thing. When we take a decision, a split-second decision, with all sincerity and full conviction, to do something good and noble, you find that split second, you feel as if you are spiritually enriched. A new sense of inner contentment and fulfillment begins to emerge in our mind. And that gives a sense of meaningfulness of life. This is the essence of the 31st verse, which we discuss in the next class. We can have interaction, I think, for about 10 minutes. You are most welcome.
Thank you, Maharaj. In the verse you just closed with, verse 31, me bhakta.
Yeah.
So all these verses leading up to that, it seems very clear that that bhakti yoga is the subject. That the subject is that the devotional practice creates all those qualities.
Yeah.
But then, what I'm struck by is the language me bhakta.
Oh, yeah. Name bhakta pranasyati.
Yes. Yeah. And we sometimes take note of when Krishna speaks in his own voice.
Yeah, yeah.
And he by calling the devotee mine, we've seen this before in the Gita, where it becomes a very loving and personal expression.
Yeah, that's true, So, Lord Krishna's words were taken down by Vyasa and put in the Anustuk meter, this particular meter. So, in the verse form. So, whenever Lord Krishna talks about, gives a promise, see, Kaunteya pradijanihi name bhakta pranasyati. See, that me bhakta, my devotee, will never come to harm, will not perish. But it means in general sense, in the commentaries, when a spiritual seeker who takes one step forward, then that step will take him to to his destination at some time or other, if not in this life, next life. So, in the Gita, again and again this comes. Even a little bit of spiritual practice will help you to start on a spiritual journey. So, whenever Lord Krishna speaks in the form of a promise, he uses the word me bhakta. That's true. But in the commentaries, there are innumerable commentaries. The most important one is Shankaracharya's commentary, then Ramanuja, Madhva, Vallabha, Nimbarka, and so on, Madhusudana, and so on. So, the common interpretation is any spiritual seeker is to be considered to be my devotee. So, in the Gita, when you find the sixth case, my possessive case, doesn't always Shashti Vibhakti, the sixth. It doesn't mean Lord Krishna's devotees. It means a spiritual seeker. You may belong to any religion. You may not even belong to any religion. Still, you can do great spiritual things. And you will be considered to be a devotee by Lord Krishna. Because Lord Krishna here should not be taken as one single deity. Any spiritual seeker. So God's devotee is not one who just prays to him. God's devotee is one who lives his life according to some of these higher ideas. That is the broadest interpretation. So whenever he gives a promise, you find me bhakta like that. Sometimes bhakta, me priya is also used in some context. I mean, when Lord Krishna is talking about the highest devotee, he uses the word priya. Means. So that's the idea. Somebody put a sign behind. Oh, behind. Oh, okay.
Thank you. So the question I had is about the decisioning process that occurs when someone surrenders to the Lord, or the surrender to that path or that journey.
Yeah.
Right? And, frankly, you're correct. I'm sure it is just a split second. But in many cases, you look at criminals, you look at a lot of corrupt politicians, so on and so forth. How can you really say that they have convinced themselves at that level of spiritual decisioning to follow that path?
Yeah, that's true. People may make a statement, well, I will start a new life. That may not mean anything. It's actually an internal, subjective process that we are discussing here, not a statement. People do that. That's true. That may not bring about any change in their lifestyle. Not at all. And not only that, those who really undergo this kind of radical transformations may not even make a statement. They will sometimes express the change through silence. This is an important thing. When you reach a stage of spiritual transformation, you don't even speak about it. If somebody says, I'm a new person, actually, if he has really changed, you'll keep quiet. Because he will demonstrate the changes in so many different ways, and you can understand, but he won't himself make a big proclamation, but tomorrow onwards I won't do that. Because one may do that in confessions, but the real confession, according to St. Augustine, real confession is a spiritual transformation. The real confession. Confessions in his well-known book by St. Augustine. That real confession is exactly what is being discussed here, that complete transformation. And that is silent, unexpressed, non-verbalized inner change that happens. Often it is expressed in silence, but also in lifestyle. Otherwise, make a statement may not necessarily mean anything, really speaking. Yeah.
Is this decision something that happens all at once, or is it many small decisions that compound over time?
Yeah, sometimes it can, of course, everything has got a process. Nothing happens all of a sudden. But the decision as such can come due to some unexpected events or experiences. But that person must have already thought over this. Mind is going through this. You may have failed many times, but suddenly something happens. So he is left with a choice where I can't go back. I can't continue what I'm doing. I have to change. And then, as I mentioned, that decision making is a silent inner process, a subjective inner process. It may not be even expressed. Sometimes it can come as a result of some shocking experience. Sometimes kind of an inner revelation it could happen. You think for some time it could happen. But you may have already gone through several stages of preparation without being fully aware of it. And then time comes. That's the idea behind. Sashi, Trotico.
Well, I had the same question as
the same question. Okay,
yeah.
That's right. Okay, yeah.
Namaskar, Maharaj.
Yeah, namaskar.
You mentioned if a spiritual seeker takes one sincere step toward God, then God will come running toward him. How do we develop that sincerity? And it's very easy to trick ourselves and say that we are taking steps forward when not really.
Yeah, sometimes for many spiritual seekers, they may be making attempts, and again they may have faltered, again they make an effort. At some stage, a time comes when you cannot really but change, and you reach a point. But again, it cannot be really explained. It depends upon one's own life. But continuously, if you get acquainted, keep yourself acquainted with these higher ideas as a part of our life, then it really happens. In some cases, it can happen gradually. That is also true. There are many verses in the Gita later on where Lord Krishna says, the buddhivedam janayed ajnanam karma sanginam. Lord Krishna says, don't try to bring about a complete radical change all of a sudden. That also comes, especially when Lord Krishna talks about karma yoga. Karma yoga means doing whatever we are doing, our duties and responsibilities with a sense of dedication, without too much of obsession for results. And then Lord Krishna says, don't tell a person all of a sudden to give up all his desires. You can't do that. So that's also statement is there. First of all, you have to develop a good desire, higher desire, something sublime, something noble, something elevating, some higher desire. And this higher desire will help you to get rid of all lower undesirable desires, unhealthy desires. So when you are equipped with a higher desire, then it becomes possible for you to go even beyond that. So this is a very important thing to remember. So there are verses where the teacher tells you not to bring about a complete change all of a sudden. But what is mentioned here is when as a result of gradual evolution, when you reach a point and when the decision becomes 100% sincere, then it is a split-second phenomenon. That's an important thing. Then it becomes a split-second phenomenon. This you can find in the St. Augustine, St. Francis of Assisi, and Tulsidas. Tulsidas' life, many of you must have heard, this man was a worldly minded person. Kalidas, or the great Indian Sanskrit poet. They were worldly minded people. And so much attached to all kinds of worldly things, but then suddenly they got a terrible shock. A shocking experience when their own object of obsessive attachment. And then they felt like everything falling down in front of them. Then their attention turned to something else, something higher. I tell you the example of Valmiki. Valmiki is an example. He was the first poet of Sanskrit language, the author of Ramayana. He was a professional robber. So he used to rob people, ambush wayfarers. Once it so happened that he tried to rob a few sages who were taking that road towards their hermitages. So the robber appeared before them with weapons and all that. Then one of them, Narada, stopped, wait a minute, we shall give you whatever you want, no problem. But can you do a favor? I want to ask you some questions. He said, no problem. Now, do you know for whose sake are you engaging in these terrible things, activities, robbing, killing people? Oh, you said he had no other job. He was a professional thief and robber. He had to take care of his family, his children, relatives, and so on. Well, you know that by doing all this, you are incurring sins. He said, yes, that I know, he told. And do you know, you are doing all this to support those people, your family, your children, your relatives, and all that. Are they going to share this sinful deed? Are they going to share your the sinful consequences of your sinful deeds? I don't know. Then go and ask them. We shall wait here till you return. And this man went, this simple man, he went and asked his wife and children and relatives. Well, he said he's a professional thief and robber, and that's how he makes his money. They said, we don't care how you bring money, but sort of like you are doing duty. But do you know that he told them this what he was doing, robbing people. He said, we are not responsible. That is your own burden. You may go to hell as a result of that is your burden. He was shocked. And then came back, he was in tears. Then the sages gave him one mantra, Rama mantra, in the sacred name of Sri Rama, and asked him to chant this name for the rest of his lifetime. So he remained. That's how he became a saint. So here, robber suddenly becoming a saint. But he was a very sincere man. Girichandra Ghosh was a very sincere person. So maybe that sincerity is sometimes explained in the Hindu mythological Puranas, because this man was a lost spiritual seeker. He was living, he had a problem. He was a saint, he was a spiritual seeker in his previous life. Then there was something happened, and so he had to postpone, he had to delay his emancipation, his spiritual liberation by one more life cycle. So he had to be born as a thief, and then he will meet the sages, and the sages will give him mantra, he became a great saint. This is how Puranas will tell you like this. So anyway, the point is, if the decision is 100% sincere, it is a split-second phenomenon. Now the point is, anyone can take this decision at any stage. You need not all of a sudden to take a decision that you are going to be Saint Francis of Assisi tomorrow. No, not necessarily. We belong to different walks of life. Along with what we are doing, we can add something more to our life scheme. Something which is more elevating. Something which make our life more meaningful, more sublime. A higher meaning, something positive can be added to our life values. That's one way to do that. So it's the beginning of the journey. And that's a grand decision, really speaking. It's a grand decision. And it will have an effect. Because you're boarded the bus, and the bus is moving. You can't help reaching your destination. It may be a long distance you have to travel, but still you are already on the road in the bus moving. So that's what Lord Krishna is talking about. Anyone can take this decision any day, any moment. Not to become a saint all of a sudden, but to add some spiritual value into our life scheme. That's what it says. So thank you. I have one important announcement.
So there are a few questions in YouTube, Mara.
YouTube, okay.
Yeah. So the question is devotee Kate. Even if one resolved to take refuge in God alone in that one moment fully, what about past karma continuing in one's life?
The past karmas will be completely obliterated. Really. The decision is 100%, then he need not worry about past karmas. That's what Lord Krishna is talking. Sadhurevasa mantavyaha. That person should be considered to be a sadhu, means a spiritual person. Because it is as good as you are boarded a bus. Now you can't help reaching your destination. It may take some time for you to reach, maybe several life cycles, according to Vedantic yoga tradition and Buddhist tradition, not just one life, but several life cycles. But you can't but reach your destination. That's the idea behind it.
There is another question from devotee Jatin.
Yeah.
How does verse 30 and karma theory go together?
How does?
Karma theory, verse 30, chapter 9, verse number 30.
Okay.
And karma theory go together.
Yeah. Just okay, one question. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Really, karma theory, you should remember, karma theory is not a rigid doctrine. Karma theory is actually a very flexible doctrine. If due to some unhealthy karmas you have become something, you are experiencing something, then through some healthy karmas you are reversing that. Now complete dedication to this decision making, to decide, take a strong decision to start a spiritual life, is also a karma. That karma completely neutralizes all other karmas that are responsible for unhelpful experiences. So remember, taking a decision to start a spiritual life, to start a new life, to open a new chapter in your life, that also is a karma. That karma neutralizes the effects of negative karmas. Karmas are not inflexible. Karmas are highly flexible. That's one important aspect of karma theory. It is not predeterminism. No, it is the opposite of predeterminism. Karma yoga theory, karma doctrine is the opposite of predeterminism. If something is responsible for what we are experiencing today, then something else can be done to reverse it. That's the whole relevance of spiritual practices. Taking a decision to start a new life is a karma. That's a much more courageous karma. That neutralizes it.
There is another question from Mark Goodrich.
Yeah.
What is the meaning of word mithyachara?
Oh, mithyachara. Mithyachara is actually, in the Gita it comes, Lord Krishna calls Arjuna mithyachara sa uchyate. You see, somebody who is full of desire, worldly ambitions, and still he talks about transitoriness of the world, talks about austerity, talks about the glory of poverty. At the same time, he is eager to get money, all kinds of worldly things. That person is called mithyachara. Achara means conduct. Mithya means false conduct. That's the idea. That's the context in which Arjuna was called a mithyachara by Lord Krishna. Yeah. In the second chapter it comes. Yeah. Okay. So thank you. There is an announcement. Next, there will be no Bhagavad Gita class next Friday, December the 10th, because there is an important event. So there will be no Bhagavad Gita class. next Friday, December the 10th. And that means the next Gita class here will be on 17th December, Friday at 7:30 p.m. So please remember, no class next Friday, December 10th. And the next Gita class will be on December 17th, on Friday, 7:30 p.m. Thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Rama Krishnarpanamastu.